Elijah Blackwood needed a break. After 6 long months stationed on the frontier planet Silvia, surrounded by endless mission reports and tactical assessments, even the most dedicated special operations officer could use a moment to clear his head. The pressure had been relentless, and he could feel the weight of it pressing down on him, gnawing at his concentration. So he decided to step away, headed to the dense, violet-hued forest that stretched beyond the perimeter of the base, a place he'd been curious about since his arrival. The bioluminescent flora of the forest glowed faintly, casting an ethereal light over everything, almost as if nature itself was alive, pulsing with energy. It reminded him of Earth's glowing creatures, only this felt different, stranger, more alien. As he made his way through the underbrush, the faint hum of his advanced stealth suit provided a constant companion, its sleek black material hugging his athletic frame. His sharp blue eyes scanned the environment methodically, a reflex ingrained in him after years of combat training. Every rustle of leaves, every subtle shift in the shadows was registered and analyzed. Old habits died hard. But then, something unusual caught his attention. A small movement among the glowing undergrowth. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. Was it a trick of the light? But as he stepped closer, the figure in the forest became clearer. It was small, too small to be any known animal. Lying unconscious on the soft, luminescent moss was a delicate figure, barely 2 feet tall. Her skin was a soft lavender hue, and her long hair, the same color, was tied back in a loose ponytail. She wore what could only be described as an alien version of a metallic bikini, shimmering with its own inner light. Elijah blinked, kneeling down for a closer look, wondering if he was imagining it. But no. She was real. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. The moment he reached out to gently touch her, his hands warm against her delicate skin. She stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing iridescent orbs that seemed to reflect the cosmos itself. For a split second, they stared at each other, his piercing blue eyes meeting hers. Both were equally amazed, caught in the surreal moment of discovery. Then, without warning, she screamed. "Please don't eat me," she squeaked, her voice a strange blend of terror and what sounded oddly like flirtation. Elijah's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He quickly withdrew his hands, but kept his gaze steady on her. "What?" he muttered, trying to make sense of her words. "I know I'm small and probably look delicious," she continued, her voice still shaky. "But I taste terrible. Really, really terrible." Elijah blinked, stifling a laugh. This had to be the strangest first encounter with an alien species he'd ever had. Still, he composed himself, knowing this was more serious than it seemed. "Easy there, little one," he said softly, his voice gentle, trying to reassure her. "I'm not going to eat you, I promise." She blinked rapidly, her tiny hands clutching his gloved fingers, still trembling. But you're so enormous. And all the stories say that giant aliens devour smaller species," she added, still eyeing him warily. Elijah let out a quiet chuckle, trying to hide his amusement. "I assure you, humans don't eat sentient beings," he said, his tone calm and steady, hoping to soothe her fears. The alien girl paused, studying him for a long moment. Her wide eyes, reflecting stars and galaxies, softened slightly. "You're not angry?" Elijah shook his head. "Not at all." The girl's tiny lips parted in a smile, and for the first time, Elijah felt like the tension between them might begin to ease. "I'm Commander Elijah Blackwood of the Earth Special Operations Division," he said, introducing himself. "And you are—" She hesitated, clearly cautious, but then spoke, her voice quieter now. "I'm Lilia. I'm a Silid. We're native to this world, but we usually stay hidden from the larger species." "Silid," Elijah repeated, his mind racing. A new species, here in front of him, and she looked almost human in a way. Her features were delicate and refined, but those eyes, those shimmering eyes, made it clear she was anything but ordinary. "Well, Lilia," Elijah said, smiling, "it's a pleasure to meet you, but tell me, what were you doing out here in the forest? Are you all right?" Lilia shifted slightly in his hands, and Elijah noticed the slight wince on her face. "I was gathering luminescent moss for my village's healing chambers," she explained. "I must have slipped and hit my head on one of the crystal formations." Elijah glanced around, his eyes landing on a small, shimmering pouch nestled in the underbrush, just a few feet away from where he'd found her. "Is that it?" he asked, reaching out to grab it with his fingertips. "Yes," she said excitedly, her voice gaining strength. "That's it. You found it. Thank you." Elijah carefully handed her the tiny bag, his fingers steady. "Perhaps you should rest a bit before heading back to your village," he suggested. "That bump on your head could be serious." Lilia took the bag, but as her tiny hands grasped it, her gaze met his again. For a brief moment, the forest was still, the only sound the soft rustle of leaves above them. Her voice, quieter now, almost hesitant, filled the space between them. "Would you mind sitting with me for a while?" she asked, her tone gentle but with an odd mix of curiosity. "Just until the dizziness passes, and maybe you could tell me about your world." Elijah was caught off guard. He hadn't expected to be asked such a thing, but looking into her eyes, feeling the strange, inexplicable pull between them, he couldn't bring himself to refuse. "I'd like that," he replied, finding his voice as he settled down on a nearby fallen log. Carefully, he held her at chest level, offering her a comfortable perch where they could talk. As the minutes passed, the two of them began to talk. Lilia shared stories of the Silid civilization, how they lived in harmony with the crystalline forest, using its natural resonance for healing and communication. In turn, Elijah shared tales of Earth and humanity's journey to the stars, of battles fought and victories won, of the challenges of being human in a galaxy full of unknowns. The forest's bioluminescence grew stronger as the dusk approached, bathing them in an ethereal glow. As the light shifted, Lilia looked up at him, her eyes twinkling with a mix of intrigue and something else, something more personal. "I should return to my village," she said, her voice soft. "But would you come back tomorrow? Same place, same time? There's something I'd like to ask you, but I need to consult with our elders first." Elijah felt a strange sense of anticipation welling up in his chest. "I'll be here," he promised. Lilia smiled, the warmth of it melting the last of the tension in the air. "I'll see you tomorrow, Commander," she said, her voice musical and light. As she disappeared into the underbrush, Elijah sat still for a moment, wondering if he had imagined the entire encounter. But as the soft glow of the forest washed over him, he realized that something had shifted. Something important. And whatever that was, it was only just beginning. The next day, Elijah found himself doing something he hadn't expected. He was checking his appearance in the reflective surface of his datapad more than he cared to admit. He told himself it was just part of his standard protocol, maintaining a professional appearance as a special operations commander. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was primping for Lilia. He adjusted the circular blue light indicators on his shoulders, ensuring everything was in place. The soft hum of his stealth suit was familiar. But today, the forest felt different. The bioluminescent flora pulsed with more intensity, almost as if nature itself was attuned to his anticipation. His footsteps were lighter as he walked through the glowing trees, his senses heightened, as though something special was waiting just ahead. When he reached the spot they had agreed upon, he stood for a moment, letting the serenity of the forest calm his mind. The gentle whispers of the wind, the faint hum of the crystal formations, and the soft glow of the foliage made the entire place feel like it was from another world. Then, he heard a familiar voice. "You came back," Lilia's melodic voice carried from above, drawing his attention. Elijah looked up, and there she was, perched on a glowing crystal formation, her lavender skin shimmering in the soft forest light. Today, her metallic attire seemed to shimmer even more intricately, reflecting the light in mesmerizing patterns. She had an air of confidence now, far more at ease than when he first found her. "I gave my word, didn't I?" Elijah smiled, offering his hand to her. Lilia gracefully stepped onto his palm, her tiny form now relaxed and full of confidence. As she settled cross-legged in his hand, her presence felt less strange, more familiar. They'd already shared something important, an understanding that transcended the usual boundaries of species. And now there was something else, something deeper. "I spent half the night convincing our elders that you weren't going to eat the entire village," Lilia said with a mischievous glint in her eye. Elijah chuckled, the sound light and easy. "I hope you were persuasive." "Oh, very," Lilia said with a smile, her galaxy-filled eyes sparkling. "I told them how you rescued me, and how your eyes hold more kindness than any being I've ever met." Elijah's heart skipped a beat. The warmth in her gaze was unmistakable. But just as quickly she added something that made him blink. "Though I may have left out the part about how attractive I find you." Elijah's ears burned at the comment, and he couldn't hide his surprise. He had expected her to be curious about humans, perhaps cautious. But this was something else. Lilia noticed his flustered expression and laughed, a soft tinkling sound like wind chimes. "Don't worry," she waved her tiny hand dismissively. "Among my people, it's perfectly normal to be direct about attraction. We believe life's too precious to waste time dancing around our feelings." Elijah chuckled, trying to keep his composure. "I think I can handle it," he said, though he could feel a flutter in his chest. Lilia tilted her head and studied him. "I sense humans are different, though. You tend to be more reserved." Elijah nodded, his eyes softening. "True. We tend to hide our feelings until we're sure. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't find you fascinating." His voice held a quiet sincerity now. Lilia's playful grin softened, and for a moment the world around them seemed to still. It was just the two of them, sitting in the midst of an alien forest, connecting on a level that was far more profound than either of them had expected. But then, Lilia's expression shifted to something more serious. "But that's not why I asked you here today," she said, standing up on his palm, her tiny form radiating determination. "We need your help." Elijah's heart skipped a beat. He had already sensed the change in the atmosphere. He could tell this wasn't just a casual conversation anymore. This was serious. Lilia continued, her voice a little softer now. "Our village is under threat. There are creatures we call shard claws. They've been growing more aggressive lately. They used to avoid our settlements, but something's changed. They're attacking our crystal gardens, destroying our healing chambers." She hesitated for a moment, her eyes flickering with pain. 3 days ago, they took one of our children." Elijah's jaw tightened. He couldn't help but feel the weight of her words. "I'm sorry, Lilia," he said, his voice low with empathy. "That's terrible." Lilia looked up at him, her galaxy-filled eyes pleading. "Our warriors are skilled, but we're just too small to fight them. These creatures, they're about your size, and their crystalline claws can cut through our strongest materials. We need someone strong, someone who can fight them." Elijah's heart was already made up. He didn't need more explanation. "I'll help," he said without hesitation. "Of course I will." Lilia's eyes widened in surprise, as if she hadn't expected him to agree so easily. "Just like that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't need anything in return," Elijah said, his voice steady and firm. "You need help protecting children from monsters. That's all I need to know." For a long moment, Lilia stood still, her eyes studying him. Then she did something Elijah hadn't expected. She walked up his palm, placed her tiny hands gently on his wrist, and hugged his thumb. "The elders always said humans were dangerous because of their size and strength," she whispered, her voice full of warmth. "But they never mentioned that your hearts might be just as big." Elijah felt something shift inside him as he carefully curled his finger around her, returning the gesture in a gentle embrace. "Tell me everything you know about these shard claws," he said, his voice steady. "If we're going to protect your people, I need to understand what we're up against." Lilia's expression grew serious, and she began to explain everything she knew. The shard claws were drawn to the energy of the crystals, and their attacks seemed to be more calculated than ever before. But the Silid couldn't generate enough power to fight back. "What if we combine your knowledge with my strength?" Elijah suggested, the wheels turning in his mind. "Could you teach me how to manipulate the crystal energy?" Lilia's eyes lit up with hope. "Yes, but it would require very close contact," she said, her voice hesitating for a brief moment. "The energy flows through you, and I would need to guide your movements. Would that be acceptable?" "I think I can handle it," Elijah said, trying to keep his voice steady. His pulse quickened at the thought of their combined efforts. Lilia smiled, and her form gracefully climbed onto his shoulder. "I'll show you how it's done. Just follow my lead, and together we can defeat them." What's the connection between them was undeniable. As Elijah prepared to learn the crystal manipulation techniques, something about this partnership felt different. There was more than just a tactical alliance here. Something deeper, something far more personal was beginning to form between them. And as the first rays of sunset began to touch the crystal formations, Elijah realized this mission might change not just his life, but the entire future of the Silid and humanity. The following days were a whirlwind of learning and discovery for Elijah. His mission on Silvia had started as a routine post, an assignment to assess and monitor the situation on a remote frontier world. But now, everything had shifted. Now, it was about something far bigger than any mission he'd ever been a part of. Something personal. Something he wasn't sure he was ready for. The Silid's crystal energy was unlike anything Elijah had ever encountered. Lilia's small form, perched on his shoulder, had become his guide through a new world of power and resonance. It was strange, the way she seemed to mold the energy, her touch so light, yet somehow knowing, as if she was tapping into something ancient, something alive within the crystals. As the sun dipped below the horizon on the third day of their training, Elijah found himself sitting on a smooth stone outcrop, watching the bioluminescent forest flicker with the vibrant hues of the crystals around him. Lilia was perched on his palm, her tiny hands moving with practiced ease as she adjusted the flow of crystal energy, teaching him the subtle ways it worked. "Close your eyes, Commander," Lilia instructed softly, her voice a melodic hum that seemed to echo through him. "Feel the crystals around you. Let the resonance guide you." Elijah obeyed, shutting his eyes, letting the soft hum of the crystals fill his mind. For a moment, everything else faded. The sound of the forest, the soft glow of the bioluminescence, the quiet weight of Lilia's presence. All of it seemed to blend into one harmonious pulse. He focused on the energy, allowing himself to sync with the rhythm that resonated from the crystals. Lilia's tiny hands gently pressed against his neck, guiding his movements with her steady touch. "Focus," she whispered, her voice close to his ear, sending a shiver down his spine. "The energy flows through you, Commander. Let it resonate with your heartbeat." The connection between them grew stronger as Elijah felt the crystal energy stir inside him. It was like a current, warm and powerful, running through his veins. He felt his body tingle with the raw force of it, but it was Lilia's touch, her soft guidance, that made it all come together. "Good," she said, her voice warm with approval. "Now raise your hands, channel the energy outward." Elijah did as she instructed, his hands lifting slowly. As he did, he felt the energy gathering, swirling around him, responding to his will. He extended his hands further, and the energy crackled in the air, sparking like electricity, swirling into a brilliant, radiant light. "That's it," Lilia said, her voice filled with pride. "You're a natural at this." Elijah opened his eyes, staring in awe at the shimmering energy that had formed around his hands. For a moment, it felt like he was standing at the center of something much larger than himself, something bigger than he could have imagined. "You really are a natural," Lilia repeated, her voice teasing but filled with admiration. "Most Silid take weeks to learn what you've grasped in just a few hours." Elijah couldn't help but smile, the excitement of the training making his heart race. But even in the midst of this powerful moment, there was something else, something that had been growing between them since their first meeting. Lilia, sitting comfortably in his palm, gazed up at him with her galaxy-filled eyes. "I had an excellent teacher," she said softly, a playful glint in her eye. Elijah's grin widened, but then something changed. The air between them seemed to shift, and for a brief moment he realized just how close they were. Their eyes locked, and in that instant, he felt something stir deep inside him, something more than just admiration for her strength, her intelligence, her beauty. It was something powerful, something he hadn't expected, something far more personal. But before either of them could speak, Lilia shifted, climbing gently from his palm to his shoulder, her tiny hands brushing against his neck. "Let's continue," she said, breaking the moment, though her voice carried a deeper warmth now, a deeper understanding. The next few hours were filled with more lessons, more crystal energy, more training, more connection. But the intensity of their bond, the way it seemed to grow each time their energies combined, didn't go unnoticed. Elijah's mind raced as he realized that what was happening wasn't just about crystals. It wasn't just about fighting the shard claws. It was about something much bigger, something he wasn't sure he was ready to face. As the sun began to set, painting the forest in a deeper glow, Lilia stopped abruptly, her tiny hand resting on his shoulder. She looked up at him, her eyes serious now, the playful warmth replaced by determination. "Elijah," she said quietly, her voice soft but firm, "there's something I need to tell you." Elijah's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just about training anymore. He knew it, and she knew it too. Lilia took a deep breath, her galaxy-filled eyes meeting his with a mixture of vulnerability and strength. This connection between us, it's not just about crystal energy. It's more than that. And I think it's changing both of us." Elijah's breath caught in his chest. He hadn't expected her to say that, hadn't expected to feel the weight of her words settle deep in his soul. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice soft, his heart pounding in his chest. Lilia glanced down, her gaze flickering with uncertainty, but when she looked up again, There was a fire in her eyes. Something more than just fear, more than just hope. There was something that told him this moment was pivotal. "I don't know what's happening, Elijah," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But every time we combine our energy, I feel something. Something deeper. I think it's more than just a bond between warriors. It's something that could change everything. For us, for our people, for the galaxy." Elijah felt a rush of emotions flood through him. Confusion, fear, excitement. But above all, something else. Certainty. He didn't know what this would mean for their future, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to walk away from this. He reached up, his fingers brushing against her tiny form, carefully lifting her from his shoulder to his hand. "We'll face this together, Lilia," he said, his voice steady, filled with a sense of resolve he hadn't known he was capable of. "Whatever it is, whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Lilia smiled, her eyes softening with something that felt like relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm not sure where this will lead, but I trust you." And with that simple statement, Elijah knew that their bond was no longer just about survival. It was something deeper, something that could change not just their worlds, but the entire galaxy. As Elijah and Lilia continued to train, the weight of their unspoken connection grew heavier. And while the threat of the shard claws loomed, the real challenge was the transformation unfolding between them, something neither of them fully understood. But one thing was certain. They were no longer just an alien and a human. They were becoming something more. And whatever came next, it was going to change everything. The sun had barely begun to set when the first signs of danger appeared. Elijah's advanced suit sensors picked up on subtle vibrations in the ground, too deliberate to be natural. His hand instinctively reached for the hilt of his blade, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The sense of urgency was different now. Lilia was at his side, her tiny form perched on his shoulder as they made their way through the dense forest. The bond between them was undeniable, and it had only grown stronger in the days since their training began. For the past few days, they had worked together to understand the intricacies of crystal manipulation, and Elijah had learned quickly. He had become adept at channeling the energy that flowed through the forest's unique flora, bending it to his will. But now, as the ground trembled slightly beneath his feet, he could feel that something was about to change. The threat wasn't just looming anymore, it was here. "Elijah," Lilia's voice broke through his thoughts, her small hand gripping the collar of his suit tightly. "They're close. I can feel them. The shard claws." Elijah looked up, his piercing blue eyes scanning the forest's edge. Through the dense trees he saw shadows moving, large, menacing figures. His heart quickened. He knew what they were up against. The shard claws were terrifying creatures, crystalline beasts that had been attacking the Silid's village. They were huge, roughly the size of a human, with jagged crystal spines protruding from their backs and razor-sharp claws that could tear through steel. But these creatures weren't mindless. They were strategic, and they were getting bolder. "They're bigger than last time," Lilia whispered, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into it. "They've adapted to our tactics. They've grown smarter." Elijah nodded, the weight of her words settling deep in his chest. He had never underestimated his enemies, and he wasn't about to start now. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just about fighting for survival. It was about protecting the people he had come to care for. It was about protecting her. Lilia's tiny hand reached down and pressed against his neck, the touch both familiar and comforting. "Remember what we learned," she said. "We have to work together. Our energy combined is the key." He nodded, taking a deep breath. They had trained for this. They had practiced, both physically and emotionally, preparing for the moment when they would face the shard claws together. The power of their connection was real, and he could feel it deep in his bones. But now, it was time to put it to the test. Without another word, Elijah moved forward, his body moving fluidly with the quiet precision of a trained soldier. He was acutely aware of the tiny form perched on his shoulder, and despite her size, her presence was comforting. Lilia's energy was still with him, running through him, a part of him in every movement. As they entered the clearing, the shard claws emerged from the underbrush, 3 of them. Their crystalline bodies glistened in the fading light, refracting the bioluminescence of the forest into deadly prismatic patterns. Their eyes were cold, predatory, and the screech they let out as they spotted Elijah sent a chill down his spine. The battle began almost instantly. Elijah's hands moved in the patterns he had been taught, channeling the crystal energy that Lilia had taught him to control. He thrust his hands forward, sending a burst of energy that collided with the lead shard claw, throwing it backward with a deafening crash. The creature let out a howl of pain as its crystalline hide cracked under the force. But there was no time to savor the victory. The other 2 shard claws charged forward, their claws slashing through the air with frightening speed. Elijah dodged and weaved, using his special ops training to stay a step ahead. But the shard claws were relentless. Their attacks were fast and powerful, and Elijah found himself fighting not just to protect himself, but to protect the one on his shoulder, the one who had become more than just a guide to him. "Focus, Elijah!" Lilia's voice snapped him back to reality, her words cutting through the noise of the battle. "Feel the crystal's pulse. Let it guide you." Elijah closed his eyes for a brief moment, feeling the familiar warmth of the crystal energy flow through him. He didn't think about it anymore. He just felt it, as if the power of the crystals had become an extension of his own being. When he opened his eyes again, everything was different. He could see the energy flowing through the air, the subtle vibrational hum of the forest. He could feel the shard claws' movements before they made them, the resonance in the crystals guiding him, telling him where to strike. As one of the shard claws lunged, Elijah moved to the side, raising his hands just in time to direct a wave of energy straight into its chest. The creature was thrown backward, its crystalline body shattering under the force of the impact. The second shard claw hesitated, as if it could feel the change in the air, but it was too late. Elijah advanced, his movements synchronized with the pulses of crystal energy that Lilia guided him through. Together, they moved as one. Their combined energy a force of nature, a perfect balance of strength and finesse. Elijah ducked under a swing of the third shard claw's massive claw, then struck back with a burst of energy that sent the creature sprawling. The final shard claw was barely a threat as Elijah delivered the finishing blow, sending it crashing to the ground with a mighty roar. The clearing was silent, save for the soft hum of the crystal energy fading into the air. Elijah stood tall, his breathing heavy but steady, his suit sensors glowing faintly. He looked down at his hands, still pulsing with the residual energy of the battle. "That was incredible," Lilia said, her tiny voice filled with awe. "I've never felt crystal energy respond like that before. When our powers combined, it was like we were the same size." Elijah smiled, his heart still racing from the battle. He looked up at her, meeting her gaze. "We're stronger together," he said, the words carrying more weight than just the battle they had won. But as he said it, a chill ran down his spine. The forest around them was eerily quiet now. The danger had passed, but there was something unsettling in the air. "What's wrong?" Lilia asked, sensing his shift in mood. Elijah's eyes narrowed, scanning the surrounding forest. There was something off, something more dangerous on the horizon. "We're not done yet," he said, his voice low. "I can feel it. There's more coming." The battle was over, but Elijah knew this was only the beginning. The shard claws had adapted, and whatever had driven them to attack had not been fully answered. Elijah and Lilia had won this fight, but something told him that a much greater challenge lay ahead. And whatever it was coming for them. The battle with the shard claws was only the beginning. Elijah could feel it in the air, the lingering tension, the weight of something larger, something more dangerous looming on the horizon. The forest was quiet now, but it wasn't the calm Elijah had grown accustomed to. There was something unsettling about the silence, something that told him their fight was far from over. Lilia's voice broke through his thoughts, soft, but filled with resolve. "We need to move. The shard claws will come again, but there's something I need to show you." Elijah nodded without hesitation. He had learned to trust Lilia, her knowledge, her instincts, and now something deeper that was growing between them. There was no question in his mind that whatever she was about to reveal, it would be important. They moved quickly through the forest, Elijah's suit sensors picking up on every shift in the air, every change in the surroundings. Lilia was perched on his shoulder, her tiny form as alert as ever, but there was an urgency in her movements that told him something had shifted. Her eyes, the deep galaxy-filled orbs, were focused, intent on something in the distance. As they walked, the bioluminescent plants around them seemed to pulse with increasing intensity, as if reacting to their presence. The deeper they ventured into the forest, the more pronounced the energy felt. It was as if the forest itself was alive, breathing with them, resonating with the very crystals they had been manipulating. "This is where I've been taking you," Lilia said, her voice full of meaning. "The ancient crystal chamber. It's hidden deep within the caves, but I think we're ready for it." Elijah followed closely behind her, sensing the change in the atmosphere. He could feel the energy growing stronger, vibrating in the air around them. The deeper they went, the more intense it became, like a heartbeat, pulsing through the very ground they walked on. They reached the entrance to a massive cavern, its mouth lined with glittering crystals that seemed to hum with energy. The walls shimmered with light, casting an otherworldly glow over everything. Lilia stepped forward, leading him into the cavern. The floor beneath their feet was smooth and covered in a soft, luminescent moss, and the air was thick with the scent of minerals and something more, something ancient. "This is where it all started," Lilia said, her voice low and reverent. "The Silid people used this chamber for centuries to tap into the crystal resonance, to communicate with the energy of the planet itself. But it's more than that. It's a place where emotions are amplified, where connections can be made that transcend space, time, and even species." Elijah took in the vast space before them. The chamber stretched high above them, the walls covered in intricate crystal formations that seemed to pulse with an inner light. It was breathtaking, but it also felt powerful and dangerous. Lilia moved toward the center of the chamber, her small form illuminated by the soft glow of the crystals. "The elders told us stories of those who could change their size by attuning themselves to the crystal resonance," she continued. "But no one has done it in generations. It's said to require the perfect connection between two beings, two hearts, two souls." Elijah's heart skipped a beat at her words. He knew what she was implying, but he wasn't sure he was ready for it. "What do you mean, change size?" he asked, his voice filled with a mix of curiosity and caution. Lilia turned to face him, her galaxy-filled eyes locked on his. "The resonance in this chamber, it responds to emotional connection. If we can achieve perfect emotional resonance, we can change, physically, emotionally, in ways that the Silid people have never fully understood. But it's not just about power, Elijah. It's about connection. true connection. Elijah stepped forward, his mind racing. "What are you asking?" Lilia's gaze softened, and she took a step toward him, her voice gentle, but full of purpose. "I'm asking you to trust me. We've already formed a bond, more than just a partnership. What I'm asking is to take that bond further, to see what we can do together, what we can become." Elijah didn't hesitate. He had already made up his mind. He had come to care for Lilia in a way that went beyond words, beyond any mission or duty he had. She was more than just an alien to him now. She was his partner, his equal, and in this moment, she was something even more. "I trust you, Lilia," he said, his voice steady, filled with the conviction of someone who had already made the decision. "Let's see where this takes us." Lilia smiled, the warmth of it radiating through him. "Good. Then let's begin." They stood together in the center of the chamber, the crystals pulsing around them, their energy rising in the air like a storm. Elijah could feel the warmth of the crystals, the hum of their energy, vibrating in his bones. He closed his eyes, focusing on the resonance, the bond between him and Lilia. It was more than just energy. It was a connection, a deep, unspoken understanding that ran through them both. He could feel it, the energy flowing between them, amplifying with each breath they took, each thought they shared. Their connection was growing stronger, more intense, and for the first time, Elijah understood what Lilia had meant. In the heart of the crystal chamber, they were no longer just two beings from different worlds. They were something else, something stronger, something more unified than he had ever experienced. The crystals around them responded, their resonance building, and Elijah could feel it too. He was changing, his body, his mind, his very being shifting in response to the crystal energy. And Lilia, he could feel her presence beside him, her energy blending with his. Then, the transformation began. The energy around them exploded, swirling like a vortex, and Elijah felt it course through him, through his veins, through every fiber of his being. The crystal resonance flowed through him, merging with his own energy, and the next moment something incredible happened. Lilia, who had been small enough to sit comfortably in his palm, began to grow. Her lavender skin shimmered with the energy of the crystals, and before Elijah could blink, she had grown to nearly his height. Her features remained the same, delicate, beautiful, but now they were on his level, their eyes meeting as equals. The transformation was staggering, not just physically, but emotionally. The energy between them had shifted. They were no longer different in size or strength. They were equals in every way. Lilia looked up at him, her galaxy-filled eyes wide with wonder. "It worked," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Elijah stood frozen, his heart racing in his chest. You're incredible!" Lilia laughed softly, stepping closer to him. "And you're not so bad yourself, Commander." But just as the words left her lips, a distant screech interrupted their moment. The shard claws. They were back, and they were angrier than ever. The transformation had worked, but Elijah and Lilia's victory was short-lived. The shard claws were back, larger and more dangerous than before. Their crystal resonance had made them more powerful, but would it be enough to protect the village? As they prepared for the next battle, Elijah knew that this fight would be like no other, and the stakes were higher than ever. The shard claws came at them in a wave, their massive forms emerging from the shadows of the forest with terrifying speed. The air crackled with tension as the sound of their screeches filled the once peaceful forest. The transformation that Elijah and Lilia had undergone in the crystal chamber had made them more powerful, more connected, but it hadn't prepared them for what was about to come. Elijah's heart was still racing from the shock of Lilia's transformation. She stood beside him now, not the small alien he had once cradled in his hand, but a woman nearly his height, her lavender skin shimmering with the residual energy of the crystals. The power between them was palpable, the energy flowing between their bodies like an electric charge. "I'm ready," Lilia said, her voice steady and determined. Her eyes were locked onto the charging shard claws, her stance poised for battle. Elijah didn't hesitate. He had never been more certain of anything in his life. "Let's finish this." The shard claws were unlike anything they had faced before. Larger, faster, and more aggressive, their crystalline scales pulsed with a red energy that seemed to fuel their rage. They were no longer just creatures. They were warriors, and they had adapted. Elijah's fingers tightened around his suit's control interface, feeling the familiar hum of the energy flowing through his body. But it wasn't just the crystals this time. It was the bond between him and Lilia. The resonance that connected them was now a force of nature, and together they would unleash it. Lilia's small form leapt onto his shoulder, her voice whispering in his ear. "They're stronger now, but so are we. Focus, and we can end this." Elijah nodded, his focus sharpening. He could feel the energy, the resonance between them, pulling at him like a gravitational force. It was the same energy they had learned to control in the crystal chamber, but now it was more than just power. It was a living force, a bond that linked them in ways that went beyond anything either of them had ever experienced. The first shard claw charged at them, its jagged crystal claws slashing through the air. Elijah ducked and rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the creature's strike. With a swift motion, he raised his hands, channeling the crystal energy into a powerful burst. The energy crackled in the air, slamming into the shard claw's chest, sending it stumbling backward. But the creature quickly recovered, its red eyes glowing with fury as it charged again. Elijah's heart pounded, but he was ready. He reached out to Lilia, his connection to her stronger than ever. "Now!" Elijah shouted. Lilia's voice echoed in his mind, guiding him as they synchronized their movements. The energy between them flared, and as Elijah raised his hands again, the crystal energy surged outward with devastating force. The shard claw was blasted backward, its crystalline hide cracking under the pressure, but the second shard claw was already on them, its massive claws swiping down at them both. Elijah felt a wave of fear for the first time since this battle began, but it was quickly replaced by something stronger: determination. He couldn't fail now. Not after everything they had been through. Lilia leapt from his shoulder, landing on a nearby rock formation. "Elijah, behind you!" she called. Elijah spun around just in time to see the third shard claw lunging at him. The creature's claws slashed through the air, and for a moment everything seemed to slow. He could feel the energy, the connection between him and Lilia reaching its peak. Their bond was guiding him, showing him the way. He reached out, drawing on every ounce of crystal energy within him, and with a roar, he thrust his hands forward. The surge of energy hit the shard claw square in the chest, sending it flying into the air with a deafening crash. Lilia was already there, her voice guiding him once more. "Finish it!" she urged. Elijah nodded. The remaining shard claws were wounded, but they were still dangerous. He moved swiftly, his hands raised to channel the final burst of energy needed to defeat them. Together, with Lilia's guidance and the strength of their bond, they combined their power in one last, devastating strike. The energy exploded outward, engulfing the shard claws in a brilliant wave of light. The creatures let out one final, pained screech before they were thrown back, their crystal bodies shattering under the force of the blast. The clearing fell silent. The bioluminescent glow of the forest flickered and pulsed, as if the very trees were breathing with them. Elijah stood tall, his suit pulsing with residual energy. But there was no time to rest. He turned to Lilia, his heart racing, his breath coming in heavy gasps. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice low but filled with awe. Lilia smiled up at him, her galaxy-filled eyes sparkling with pride. "For now," she said, her voice full of satisfaction. "We've won, but this victory isn't just ours, it's everyone's." Elijah's heart swelled with pride as he looked at her, seeing her not just as the alien he had first encountered in the forest, but as an equal, a partner. The transformation they had gone through was more than just physical. It had bonded them in ways he could never have imagined. But even as they celebrated their victory, Elijah knew that this was only the beginning. The shard claws had been the first challenge, but there would be others. They had changed not just themselves, but the entire course of their destinies, and together they would face whatever came next. As the forest settled into its quiet glow, Elijah and Lilia looked toward the horizon. The battle was won, but the shard claws were just the beginning. There were whispers in the wind, and deep within the crystal caves, ancient powers stirred. Their victory had sent ripples across the galaxy, but the true test was yet to come. The trials of the twin flames had only just begun.